Please welcome Dr. Tara.
Everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you very much to NDMI for having me here today to give a presentation to you all. I am going to apologize at the outset. I'm just coming off of 3 weeks of holiday, and this is my first work activity that I'm doing. So if I'm a little bit stilted or slow, you'll know why. First, let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm from the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center in Luang Prabang. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Laos. I'm American. I was born in Malaysia and, traveled around quite a little bit before coming to Laos about 12 years ago. And together with my co-director, started the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center as an independent museum and cultural organization to really promote more understanding and appreciation of the cultural diversity of the country. So I'll tell you a little bit about the organization as I go through. And I look forward to some of your questions at the end of the presentation as well. Okay. So just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about today, first I'll be talking a little bit about the organization itself and our background and how we started. I'll give you a little bit of a background on Laos, the country itself, and the ethnic diversity of the country, for those of you who might not be very familiar with it or have never been there. And then also talk about intangible cultural heritage in particular and how we've used at TAC intangible cultural heritage and relationships with communities to try to create this idea of a museum without walls. So we've done this in a number of ways, through research and documentation, through exhibitions, through education and advocacy. But as I'll close with, there are quite a lot of challenges in making this happen as well. Whoops, sorry. First, TAC itself, it was an independent organization that was started in 2005 as an organization by myself and my co-director, Kun Sutivillai. She is actually Lao. She worked at the National Museum of Luang Prabang, which was the old royal palace, for 10 years. And her background is actually in museums. My background is more in anthropology and sustainable development work. So originally I came to Laos to work for a development agency, an international development agency. And my background was in Africa and a little bit in Southeast Asia before I came to Laos. So we started TAC, working on TAC, because we really saw that there was a lack of accessible and engaging information about the ethnology of the country, which is very rich, as I'll go through. We sourced startup funding from private donors and from foundations, and then we opened our doors in July of 2007. So there was a lot of preparatory work before we started. And as I said, we're completely independent, so we had to start from scratch with our collection, with all of the information that we gathered, with our funding and everything. So we are listed as an independent social enterprise in Laos, so that does mean that we're listed as a business. This is partially because in Laos there isn't a clear law allowing for civil society there. As some of you might know, Laos is a communist country, so the governance works a little bit differently. So as I'll go through, we have exhibitions, permanent as well as temporary exhibitions. We have a museum shop and a boutique and a number of activities outside of our doors. Let me give you a little bit of background. We are based in Luang Prabang. Luang Prabang is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in sort of the center of the northern provinces of the country. We've seen over 400% growth in tourist arrivals to Luang Prabang in the last decade. So it's a town that's really growing very rapidly in terms of tourism, and then thus in terms of a lot of other development that comes along with it. Laos is still very much a developing country, though, if any of you have visited might know. 83% of the population is still rural and based on agriculture-based livelihoods. So that means that, we don't have big urban centers in Laos as you might have in other parts of the Southeast Asian region. And ethnic minorities make up a disproportionate share of the poor people in Laos, so rural ethnic minorities. So that means that a rural Hmong community is going to be much poorer than a Lao rural community or from a Hmong person that might live in Luang Prabang town. However, Laos is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in this part of the world. We have about 6.8 million people there, and the Lao people only make up about 55% of the population. So this is a very slim majority. This is a country in which almost half of the population is a number of very small ethnic minority groups. There are 49 officially recognized ethnic groups in Laos, but actually most anthropologists say there are many more than that. As you can imagine, trying to categorize ethnic groups and cultures is not a very easy thing to do. Cultures are constantly shifting. The way that people self-identify is always changing. So we cannot just say, at any point in time, there's exactly this many people. This map gives you a bit of an idea of where people live. I'll show you a little bit first. So we're here in Luang Prabang. These colors here kind of give you an idea of where the different groups live. So this kind of orange color is the Thai Lao people, and you can see that the Lao people and the Thai Kadai ethnic group have very much followed the Mekong River and its tributaries, which goes in through here. And then the whole northern part of the country and most of the eastern part of the country, the sort of natural barrier or border with Vietnam, is highland areas. So a lot of Laos is actually highland areas. Of course, this is northeastern Thailand here, in which actually there are more ethnically Lao people than there are in Laos itself. So let me go through some of the activities that we do at TAC. So first, our exhibitions. We have permanent exhibition on 7 different ethnic groups. Like most museums have, we have texts, we have photographs and objects. We currently have a temporary exhibition called Caregivers to Culture Keepers, stories from women in a changing Laos. And this is an exhibition that was actually a community curated exhibition and was the outcome of an activity that we did with ethnic minority women in and around Luang Prabang, young ethnic minority women, to have them document their own cultures. So we worked with an American organization which helped to train these young women using cameras, using video cameras, interviews, and worked with them to document issues that they found important in their own lives. And so what this exhibition was trying to do is really show that ethnic minority groups and young people can also interpret and show their own culture for others to sort of consume and understand as well. So TAC in our exhibitions, we really make an effort to show the sort of changing lifestyles of Laos. So the contemporary as well as the traditional. So it's not a historical museum. We do, like most museums, research, preservation, and documentation work. We do primary research in communities, though we also often collaborate with anthropologists who do work for us and with us. We have a collection currently of over 400 objects from 30 different ethnic groups. And if any of you work for museums or familiar with museums will know that this is a very small number in the whole scheme of things. But we also do activities like community cultural mapping, so different approaches to kind of documentation. And as I'll go through, a lot of this is in intangible cultural heritage as well. We also have an education and outreach arm of our organization. We have a small library, and we do school outreach work. So we have a small school outreach team that goes out to primary schools to try to teach young Lao about their own country's cultural diversity. So they actually learn very little of this in their in school. We also have a small ethnic youth internship program. So the idea is to try to get young ethnic minority people into the museum to also work there and learn more about cultural work. We do guides training, and we also do museum capacity building, usually with government museums throughout the country as well. And then we have our Advocacy and Livelihoods program. So this is actually a very large part of our work, and I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a minute. But we really try to, this is also part of my background, is trying to promote livelihoods based on traditional skills. So not just trying to interpret culture and to talk about culture as kind of an abstract and interpret it in terms of museum setting. It's also trying to show how culture can have meaning and particularly enable sort of economic goals for rural communities. So this is through through a handicraft program that we run. Currently, we have over 600 producers in 33 villages, I believe it is at the moment, all across the country. So we sell those products through our museum shop, through our boutique, and online. So this both enables rural ethnic minorities to make money from their traditional skills, but it also helps to support TAAC's work as well. We also have started in our Advocacy and Livelihoods program working more with communities like this Stitching Our Stories, this exhibition, community exhibition we did, and trying to empower them to interpret, to revitalize their own culture as well. I'll tell you a little bit about our visitors then, the kinds of people that we have to visit us. By far the largest number of people we have to come to visit us are tourists. So we're very much enabled by the foreign visitors that come to Laos as tourists. They buy a ticket, 25,000 kip, about $3 an entry. Lao citizens enter for free to the museum. We want to make sure that the museum is accessible as possible for local people. We get about 21,000 visitors per year, at least the last couple of years. And foreign tourists generally read about TAC, from TripAdvisor or from some other online forum through their guidebook, that sort of thing, through word of mouth and recommendations. And so foreign visitors are very used to the museum experience. They know how to go to a museum. They understand you buy a ticket, you go through, you read, you look at the objects, that kind of thing. This is quite different than Lao visitors. So less than 10% of our visitors are actually Lao people, which is something we would really like to change, and we're constantly striving to increase that number. And having part of our school outreach program is trying to help with that. We've actually gotten many more young people come in, particularly from the university that's there, but as well as high schools and primary schools that hear from us through our school outreach program. So generally what we've also noticed is that visitors, Lao people that come in, they really need to be engaged when they're in the museum. They don't really know how to navigate the space themselves. They're not used to the museum experience. For them, museums are kind of dry, historical, frankly quite boring places that you go on a school visit or when you're kind of forced to. So they're not kind of living, engaging, interesting places to go. And that's also not helped by the fact that in Luang Prabang there are a lot of tourists, and so they kind of think, well, that's a place just for tourists to go to. That's not really for us, for locals. And another kind of visitor typology we have are ethnic minority community members themselves. And most of the people that do come in are people that come in from our invitation, people who are coming in to do business with us, basically to sell us handicrafts or to talk with us about projects. But they have sometimes been supported, sometimes they come on their own to visit, and they're really what we call our source communities. So it's them who we are trying to represent through the exhibits and through our work. And I should note, we have about 20 staff at the moment, and most of our staff is ethnic minorities themselves as well. The north of the country the majority is ethnic minority groups. So I just wanted to show you what our mission is at TAC. What you'll notice here is that we talk about tangible and intangible cultural heritage. And we talk about supporting ethnic communities to safeguard their cultural heritage. And we talk about livelihoods development. So I would say it's not a very strict museum type of mission. It's quite a bit broader than that. ICOM's museum definition, and you can see that there are some overlaps here. They also talk about tangible and intangible cultural heritage as well, though it is much more about education, study, enjoyment, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit, I guess I would say that this kind of definition is a little bit less of an active kind of definition for a museum. So ICH and TAC. So TAC really, as an ethnology museum, what we do is exploring cultures and people, sort of the similarities between them, the differences, where people have come from, sort of where they're going, how they're evolving and changing all the time. And what we need to recognize also is that TAC is representing living cultures. So all of the groups that we represent are cultures that still exist, that are still changing and evolving. So we're not looking at kind of, you know, people that lived 100 years ago or 200 years ago and looking at artifacts that are completely historical. Everything is contemporary or can be contemporary. So documenting ICH, or intangible cultural heritage, has always been an important goal of TAC from the beginning, because it's a way of giving context and showing that these are ethnic groups that are still living. So how basically does TAC integrate this in the work that we do? So research and documentation. So what is the purpose of research? You know, some of the reasons we do it is develop exhibitions, to do documentation for our collections, and to understand better cultural practices. And there are a lot of different ways in which we try to integrate ICH into our research and documentation work. So one of the ways is really building relationships with communities. So most of the exhibits that we have all been based on current research that we have been doing with communities themselves, or working with anthropologists that are also doing work in those communities. And we build relationships with those communities. So we don't just go in, interview them, and then leave and erect an exhibition. As much as possible, we bring the communities to the exhibits as well. And we generally engage with them in handicraft development as well, so that they feel that they're also, if they're interested, so that they feel that they're also getting some sort of benefit out of the relationship with us as well. We have an informal research methodology, so I guess what we would say, as much as possible, we try not to go in a huge team that's kind of being very formal, but kind of creating sort of a rapport with our research people, with our informants. We document ICH in the field research that we do, so as much as possible we take audio recordings, video recordings as well. We do quotes and take stories as well, oral histories. And we try to use community researchers as well, so not just ourselves going in, but trying to identify people in the community who are interested to collaborate with us, and then also document parts of their own culture. And I would also say ICH very much leads our approach to acquisitions and documentation in our collections as well. So you can see here some of the things that we do with building relationships. We try very much to talk with women and men, and young and old people. So rather than just kind of going to the village leadership and perhaps talking to the people who are the most vocal, is trying to identify different kinds of informants in the community. So we do have to approach the village chief, but then very quickly, also by being an organization that's led by women, we very much recognize that there is a lot of knowledge that is held by women who might not speak Lao very well, by young people, that sort of thing. We don't set out with an hypothesis, like a specific research question necessarily. We might say, oh, well, we're interested in documenting the Gujadhur wood carving tradition, but we don't necessarily set out with a very hard, very strictly defined kind of research. So we do a lot more qualitative than quantitative kind of research. And we do try to identify issues in the community in regards to kind of changes and kind of stresses on the community and the issues that they're facing at the moment. We have done also participatory cultural mapping with communities. So this works with communities where we work together with them to have them identify resource people, places in the community, information, knowledge in the community that they see as valuable and as important to their culture, and then have them kind of try to document those and share those with us. And of course, observation is an important part of any field work. Documentation of ICH might be through photography, life stories and oral histories, video. We've been involved in a couple of different projects like the UNESCO Traditional Children's Game, which is quite a few years now, 8 years ago, probably 6, 7 or 8 years ago, where we tried to document children's games that are played by different ethnic groups. And like I was talking about, the Stitching Our Stories project, which was working with young ethnic minority women, and we had the exhibition Caregivers to Culture Keepers that came out of that. So you can see here, this is just an example of some of the kind of photography and documentation of processes that we've done. So this is a Lenten woman in Longnam Ta province in the far north of the country. And they're in the process of putting on a wedding crown. So these are silver crowns that are put on a bride as well as the bride's attendants, the groom's attendants as part of a wedding ceremony. And we actually have 2 of these wedding crowns. They're also called celestial crowns in our collections. And we've actually loaned these crowns back to the community when they've needed them for special occasions. But we also documented them, and this was shown as part of a wedding ceremony that we had a few years ago. Wedding exhibition. And then community researchers, like I was mentioning, we really try to encourage young people in the communities who show an interest to look at how they might be able to document their own culture and issues that are of importance to themselves. So the objective is both for them to be able to document their own cultures, but then also to perhaps inspire some sort of revitalization that might come from young people and spark an interest in their own culture. So what types of things are in museum collections? I guess this is a question to the floor. You can call out. Anything? Nobody is brave enough to say anything? Textiles. Textiles are in museum collections. Come on, let's hear 2 more things, and then I'll give you the rest of the answers. Jewelry, perhaps, wood carvings, ceramics. I'm sure you've heard this before. Can ICH be in museum collections as well? Would you say yes or no? Intangible cultural heritage. Yes? Yes. Okay, I heard 1 yes here, so I'm going to take that as yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really has been a question more recently for museums and a challenge to them for trying to integrate intangible cultural heritage into their collections and into their activities. So, traditionally museums are used to kind of objects, documenting and collecting objects. So everything from textiles to ceramics to, household tools to religious items. But nowadays, stories that go along with those objects, photographs, video, audio, music, songs, oral histories, they can all become part of that. But the research methods for documenting ICH is much more complex. So rather than just kind of collecting objects, sort of documenting ICH takes a much more complicated and more in-depth sort of approach to collection. So TAC's collections also, I would say are also not all kind of quote unquote antique. You know, we have pieces in our collection that were made 2-3 years ago, you know, and then we also have pieces that might have been made 70 years ago. Very few of our things would be considered really precious or really, you know, historical. But that's an important part of our work, is documenting not just traditional, but also the modern as well, and showing how living cultures are constantly changing and evolving as well. So here we show a little bit about our exhibitions, how we show intangible cultural heritage in our exhibitions. So one of the things that you'll see here, like we show photographs of people, and you can't see here because it's a little bit small, but we also have quotes from people that we interview. So what people like, I think a lot of times when they come to TAC, is the fact that they feel as if they're hearing from people themselves, that there's a personal kind of interaction. So when we also show objects, you know, like for here, this is a Taidam mosquito net and bedding that's traditionally prepared as part of a wedding bridal trousseau, is information about the people who made these objects, how they were used, the processes of them, what significance they had in the community. So it's not just an object with a number and a name and an age, but it's understanding who is behind it and what place it held in the culture. We also have very much more now been integrating videos and audio recordings and photographs into our exhibits. This is very much contingent on funding. Again, we're an independent organization, so we don't have an endowment. We don't get regular funding from the government or from a ministry. So depending on how much money we have, though the last few years, we have definitely in our temporary exhibits been able to integrate video much more. And of course, now with the advent of technology, we can use smartphones, you know, even if it's more basic, to integrate video and audio and sound into our exhibits. And the other thing that we try to do is bring community members in to develop the exhibit. And in a minute, I'll show you a case of an exhibit that we developed together with the community as well. So how can we exhibit, how can we engage community members in exhibition development, providing information, working with us on the research itself. So rather than us just interviewing, kind of taking a more collaborative approach to it. A lot of times we've worked with communities and had them loan objects to us, so from communities themselves, so not just us buying or using pieces from our own collection, but asking them if they'd be willing to loan pieces to us, and helping to install an exhibition. So I'll show you more about that in a minute. And an important part of our ICH work is education and outreach, you know, reaching out to youth and having them engage in the work that we do as well. So as I mentioned, we have the library, and we visit schools to do activities, sort of hands-on activities, to raise awareness and appreciation for cultural diversity. And we also now, as of 2 years ago, have been funding children to come into our museum, so paying for transportation and a day from their school where they can come into TAC and do activities there. So they might learn basket weaving, Hmong embroidery, go for a tour through the exhibits and do a treasure hunt in the exhibits. And as I mentioned again, we do guides training and museum capacity building. So this is just making sure that other people also recognize the importance of ICH and how they can use it in their lives. So talking a little bit more about our advocacy and livelihoods development, so as I mentioned, we have a handicrafts program. That's actually a very large part of our work. Exhibitions might only change, you know, once a year or so, but our museum, our shop and handicrafts activities are constantly in action. So we have a number of handicrafts from communities that are textiles, wood carving, bamboo weaving work, embroidery, silver, applique work, batik work, using a variety, cotton, silk, hemp. And as I mentioned, we have over 600 producers currently, and most of these producers are ethnic minority women, rural ethnic minority women. So again, as I said, they are form a disproportionate share of the poor in Laos. An average of 50% of the income from our shops go directly back to the artisans themselves as well. So we operate on fair trade principles. We are a member of Fair Trade Laos, and this is our way of kind of trying to partner with communities to have them see some sort of tangible benefit from working with us. So one of the reasons handicrafts have ended up being such an important part of our work is because we've seen really that it's an important supplementary source of income for these communities. And it also helps to alleviate their need to sell cultural artifacts, antique, older pieces of cultural artifacts. So the hope is that if new pieces are being produced and there's a market for those new pieces, they won't have to raise cash to improve their house or to buy a motorbike by selling off the antique textile or the antique silver necklace that they have, that they can keep that in their family and keep it within their community as well. And we also feel that though it's maybe a more capitalist-based, market-oriented way of promotion, it also helps with the transmission of traditional skills and knowledge. Young people these days in Laos, a rapidly developing country where people are looking for cash, they're going and getting educations, they're starting to want to work outside of the home and earn incomes. They're not content to just sit at home and weave on the loom or learn how to make a basket that's going to take them 2 weeks to make. They want to know that there's going to be some benefit out of that. It doesn't just have cultural value anymore. It needs to have an economic, financial value. So helping to make sure there's a market for a bamboo basket from a collector is going to make sure that there are young people that then want to weave that basket, whereas in the past it might just have been done, for their own use. So I'm now just going to talk a little bit about an example that we had of an exhibition from 2009 to 2011. It was funded actually by the U.S. Embassy of the country in Laos. And the exhibition was called Splendor and Sacrifice. It was focusing on Taoism that is practiced by two ethnic minority groups, the Lentin and the Yao Mien, who are also in northern Thailand actually. And so we did a number of different things, research, we had the exhibition, and we had handicraft development and education activities. So I'll go through these briefly before I lose all of your interest and everyone goes to sleep in the nice, cool darkness. So we have, so the research and documentation work that we did, we worked with community resource persons again, so people that we had actually developed a relationship with for years beforehand, and recorded a number of ceremonies. So the research for this exhibition took place probably over 3 years. And we recorded ceremonies by video, we took photos, we went there for observation. Again, since we had a good relationship with the community, anytime they had anything special going on, they would just ring us up, and tell us, oh, we're doing this ceremony, or our Yao Mien New Year this year is going to be on these dates. Do you want to come and see it? We would record object names and keywords and phrases in their own languages as well, so not just in English or in Lao. And we tried to document the making of ritual materials on videos. So these are a lot of ephemeral materials made out of paper, out of straw, of bamboo, things that kind of degrade very easily. And we also contracted an anthropologist who worked with us and had been working with them for decades. So the exhibition that we developed, so you can see here, emphasized intangible cultural heritage as well as tangible cultural heritage. So we had a recreation, you can see back here, of a ordination ritual. And we had a lot of the exhibition was photographs of the different rituals that were going on, and we also had video in the exhibition as well. We actually invited community resource people and funded them to come to TAC to help us installed the exhibition. So they helped us with the labeling, kind of putting things up and showing us, okay, this is exactly how we think that we should display things. And the community also recreated a lot of the ephemeral objects for the ordination scene. So the paper decorations and the offerings to the gods that were necessary. They made it, in the week before the exhibition went up. And they participated in the opening. We had them give demonstrations of some of their traditional arts. And you can see here, these are men who were doing calligraphy work because they used Chinese characters in their writing. And these were guides, actually, so tour guides who would come to the opening and were interviewing them as through the opening ceremony. So the hope was then that these guides are then going to be able to better interpret this information and learn more from the community members themselves, not just through the exhibition or speaking to us. So we also had education and outreach activities. We identified 4 ethnic youth interns. So these were 2 girls and boys from each of the communities who then were based at TAC for the month after the exhibition. And they did a number of activities with us, with youth from local schools. Led some tours, that kind of thing. And then after they went back to their communities, they also continued with us as community researchers. And some of them we are still in touch with and work with them on handicrafts development and if we have continued questions. So the hope was really that we would strengthen pride in these young people for their own culture and be able to kind of reflect on the aspects of their culture that they wanted to really hold on to. The Advocacy and Livelihoods program aspects of this exhibit as well. Community members were really given an opportunity to interpret their own culture for these audiences. So rather than just staff from TAC talking with them, with audiences, having the community members, we felt was a very powerful way of having them advocate for their own interests. We also created a Yao Mian and Yao Mun section or Lenten section in our shop. So those were products that came from those communities that was helped to generate income for them. In the few years after the exhibit, they earned over $15,000 from the handicrafts from that exhibit. They've earned more than that since then. And also doing the handicraft demonstrations as well was a part of that. Now to just wrap up finally, talking about, I've sort of painted this very rosy picture of how, important ICH is and how great it is and how important it is in museums. But there are a number of very, very real challenges, especially in small museums or independent museums, and even, large museums as well. Researching ICH is much more time-consuming and complex than just researching, sort of collecting objects and kind of getting a little bit of information about each object. Staff, a lot of times have heard from museums that it's very difficult for their staff to kind of document ICH because it requires a whole different set of skills than what they're used to. And there are definitely gaps and barriers between the communities and staff, and for TAC that was definitely the case as well, something that we had to really kind of work on to combat. Displaying ICH in exhibitions is much more complex than simply material culture. I mean, simply putting down a number of textiles with a few labels on them is different than trying to show how the textiles are dyed, how they're woven, who makes them, why they're made, how they used to be made 30 years ago, how they're made today, et cetera. So it can definitely require more budget and more technology. So this is a way in which technology is very helpful, but can also cost money to some extent. And also planning outside exhibitions and activities is definitely a strain on resources. So if we want to have handicraft demonstrations or we want to have a festival, it requires more people, more time, more resources. And education, part of the education work, using ICH is an important and is a very good way of engaging young people and moving beyond the museum itself, beyond sort of the brick and mortar museum. However, again, it takes resources. So for example, at the moment, we have a project documenting oral storytelling by women, ethnic minority women, and we've put it up on YouTube, so you can visit our website and see that as well as called Women in Folk Tales. So it's got women from Hmong, Khmu, and Dailu communities that are telling traditional stories in their own languages with translations. But again, going out and so it's on YouTube, so now young people can watch it. We've also chosen one of each of those stories and animated it, so they're cartoons, making it a little bit more accessible for young people now who, like watching cartoons and animations. But again, that took a lot of work for us to do that. We documented 19 stories, I think, and it's a project that's been ongoing for more than a year and required outside fundraising. And again, livelihoods development. Our handicrafts work is something that we're very proud of and that has seen a lot of huge benefits for the communities we work in, but it takes a lot of time. We're working with communities that in many cases are not numerate or literate, so they have a very hard time with writing things down, adding things up. Some of them are not very used to using mobile phones. We have to figure out how to get handicrafts from a rural community to Luang Prabang and then to the market, so they might have to send them on the bus. Transferring money to them and helping them open up a bank account is part of the work. And also, we're talking about handmade goods that in the past were made by just one person, however they wanted to make it, in a completely individual way. But now we're asking them to make, 100 pieces that are all similar color, similar size, similar quality, that kind of thing, in order for us to be able to sell it for an agreed upon price. So kind of melding handiwork with kind of market demands is also complex as well. And unfortunately, this has happened all over the world in the past. The importance of cultural heritage or the need to revitalize, cultural traditions is often not recognized in communities with a lot of competing interests on their time. However, we do believe that it is important to foster pride and identity in communities. And we do think that using intangible cultural heritage is a good way of being able to do that. We're going to be more likely to be able to promote appreciation for ethnic minority cultures by, our intangible cultural heritage work, by ethnic minority festivals, by going to local schools and doing exhibitions that are working with communities themselves. And we would definitely at TAC like to do even more revitalization work. Again, this is very much up to resources as well, both financial as well as human resources and time. But in the future, we also hope to move more into the realm of community museums, working more with communities that we have relationships with and helping them, especially those that receive tourists, helping them to interpret their culture for visitors in their own terms and on their own terms. Thank you very much.